Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Strange Pathways. It's been kind of a lonely week for me. Not gonna lie. My lovely wife Ariana went to DC to go to a friend's wedding, and I decided to stay behind. Take care of a few things around the house. Give her a little time to herself. I think time apart is important for a couple. Makes you appreciate the time you have together. But I do miss her. I miss her terribly. And in just a few hours, I'm going to take the long hour-and-a-half drive to Cumberland, Maryland, pick up my lovely wife at the train station, and bring her back home. I'm missing her. She's missing me. I do love the woods. Right now, I live in a more urban setting, but previously, I did live in the middle of the woods. I lived in a 3-story A-frame in the woods in Mount Davis, Pennsylvania, highest point in Pennsylvania. Forest for miles. And if the cards are played right, I plan to move to Oroville, California. The wife and I have our eye on a little off-the-grid cabin. Hopefully the wildfires won't consume the cabin. A lot of spots have been decimated by the wildfires. The location where the Bigfoot chattering, the Sierra Sounds, has been destroyed by wildfires. I can attest as well that the forest can be a very, very strange place. In my time in the forest, I've seen a few things that I couldn't explain. Lights dancing over a 300-year-old cemetery. Yowls, yips, and growls that no animal I've ever heard before. I think probably the most interesting thing that happened to me, my first wife and I were out late one night. We'd come home. It was about 2:30, 3 o'clock. We'd made the long drive on the dirt roads through the forests of Mount Davis till we got to my place. We got out of the car and walked down the hill to my house when we started to hear an organ playing. Now remember, this is 3 a.m. We're about 5 miles deep in the woods, and we can hear an organ playing. It was so surreal. It was so strange. Our first story has to do with that kind of in-the-forest bucolic strangeness. This was submitted to Reddit on the Humanoid Encounters board by a user going by the name Perpetual Connection. I'd looked over this. I had taken some notes on it. And then I realized no matter what I did, it wasn't going to be as good as the author's own words. So, I'm going to speak in the author's own words. Perpetual Connection says, quote, I'm a hunter. I like to hunt wild boar specifically. Though I have been deer hunting and have been known to get a turkey for Thanksgiving, I mostly hunt boar. For those of you that don't know, boar are a big problem in the United States. A sow can have 2 litters a year, and it's not uncommon for a litter to consist of 10 or more pigs. Given that pigs eat anything and everything, it's not hard to see why the Department of Fish and Wildlife makes it legal to hunt them with almost no restrictions. In my state, it's illegal to hunt most large mammals with night or thermal vision scopes, with the exception of boar and coyote. I'd been saving for a year, mostly fun money. It's hard to explain to your wife that a scope that costs literally twice as much as the rifle I was mounting on it was worth it. But I did it, I took it to a range and sighted it in. There was an area that was peppered with boar activity that I knew would be perfect for a night hunt. It was easily accessible with my truck, with easy-to-find spots that I could set up in that overlooked a large, easy-to-navigate clearing. The night started uneventful, mostly me tinkering with my new toy, cycling through the settings. I was a little impatient. I'd spotted multiple deer, but they were out of season, and like I mentioned earlier, my current setup wasn't legal for deer. I moved to another spot I'd seen days earlier that probably wasn't much better than my first, but it gave me something to do and a new angle to look around with my new scope. After an hour or so of glassing the area, it dawned on me. This spot doesn't have much animal activity at all. No rabbits or owls. The deer that I'd seen were hundreds of yards from where I was. Why was this pocket of land so dead at night but lively in the day? I'd set up around 10 p.m. and it was about 2 a.m. when I started to think about packing up, maybe setting up a target before I left. I heard a crunch come from the direction I came from before. I panned my scope over and saw the silhouette of a small bear. It's important to note that my scope isn't exactly night vision. It's a thermal scope, kind of like a black and white version of what you see in the Predator movies. I adjusted my range and zoomed in a little. I remember jolting a little when I saw that it wasn't really a bear, but it was a man. Because he was so low and hunched over, I thought I was looking at a young bear. Is that a game warden? It couldn't be. I would have seen the headlights coming up the road from where I was perched. And where could he have walked from? I was 30 miles away from anything and on public lands. I was about to call out when I noticed he was naked. No shoes, pants, or anything. I remember being disturbed by his movements like a squirrel or something. Twitchy and grabbing at the foliage, sniffing around and palming the tree. Was that my tree? The one I'd been leaning against earlier? The thought terrified me. Could he smell me? Then he did something I still have nightmares about today. He squatted and placed his hands in the dirt between his feet and stared straight up like a dog in mid-howl. And I heard it, a voice coming from that direction, a female voice. "Help, I'm lost." There was a long pause, but neither of us moved a muscle. The center of my sights was trained at the dirt in front of his feet. I couldn't bring myself to aim directly at another person. Were they lost? Was this some guy that had gone crazy out here? Why was his voice so feminine? "Help, please, I can't walk," the voice called out. That's when I called bullcrap. Not only could he walk, when I first saw him, he was traversing the land with ease for a naked person. So good, I mistook him for a bear. That's a flipping trap. This guy is trying to lure me to him with a damsel in distress routine. Luckily, the lack of activity before had caused me to pack up most of my gear. I think I may have left behind a hat and a sitting pad, but I didn't give a crap in that moment. I took my eyes off of him for a moment to get my pack on. I buckled my chest strap and scrambled for my rifle. To my horror, he was in the same position, but his face was staring in my direction, and I swear I saw him smile. How had he heard me get up and put my gear on? He must have easily been 150 yards away. "Flip off," I screamed in that direction. He stood upright, and it hit me how tall and skinny he was, easily 6 feet, and very lean. He took a couple of long strides in my direction, and I instinctively sent a round sailing above his head into the tree line. He was freaky as hell, but he hadn't really threatened me. What would I tell the cops? He stopped dead in his tracks and hunched down on all fours. "The next one will mess you up. Go away!" He stayed on all fours, and this time I had my sights on the center of him. His eyes were just above the grass like a large cat or something. I was trying to stop my trembling and knew that my voice had cracked a little on that last warning. I was terrified. That standoff probably only lasted a minute or two, maybe less, but it felt like forever. In an instant, he bolted left towards the tree line opposite the road. So much for not being able to walk. I couldn't keep him in my scope, he was moving so fast. He disappeared into the brush, and I sent another round sailing high in his direction. I racked another round and tried to pocket that mag and swap for a fresh one, but I dropped it and didn't bother looking for it. I wasn't far from my truck, and I wanted to get out of there. I could hear him in the distance, yelling in this weird sound that could have been a laugh or a cry. I scrambled up the trail and arrived at my truck breathless. I tossed my gear into the cab, but kept the rifle in the passenger seat and sped off. For the longest time, I told that story from the perspective of having spotted some deranged crackhead living off the land like some kind of caveman. I reported it to Fish and Game, but all they did was scold me for hunting at night alone. Never received an update. It wasn't until I told this story at a camping trip that my nephew told me about Wendigos, rakes, and skinwalkers. My story scared the heck out of him because the spot we were camping was technically the same forest I'd seen this jerk in, just 50 miles east of it. He was so spooked his mom, my cousin, had to take him home. She was really angry. I've gone down the rabbit hole on one of these scary stories. I'm not saying what I saw was definitely a Wendigo or a skinwalker. I'm saying that if such a thing exists, I may have dodged quite the bullet that night, or maybe it was just a tweaker in the middle of the night. Either way, thought I'd share. What fascinated me quite a bit, don't get me wrong, the story is absolutely incredible. The story continues. Another Redditor by the name AGA1999 responded to this story. His post goes as follows. I live in Iraq. I know members of my family who either served in the military in rural areas or lived on the countryside, like the stories I heard about the encounters my great-grandmother used to have with humanoid creatures who live in the woods of southern Iraq. They always describe them like how you guys who live in the U.S. describe them. Freakishly tall, white, pale skin. They can mimic voices and lure people in either by calling for help or acting friendly. They're also considered to be shapeshifters and cannibalistic. They call them Tantals. It's uncanny how thousands of miles apart such a creature appears to have the same description. The origins of this humanoid, considered to be a jinn, which is an Islamic/Arabic concept of a humanoid, powerful, invisible people who live with us on Earth. Some are good and some are bad, and there are hundreds of types. The Tantal is a famous jinn that appears to humans to trick them. The thing that hit me about this story, the thing that hit me with the Tantal, that night on Mount Davis, where my first wife and I heard the organ playing in the woods, I had to convince my first wife not to go into the woods after it. She wanted to go. She wanted to see where the music was coming from. Are these creatures that adept at luring us in that they somehow psychically latch on, figure out what we want to hear, and give it to us? Maybe our desires can be used against us as a trap by the Tantal, by the skinwalkers. Maybe that's what happened to the gentleman in our next story. Granger Taylor was born October 7th, 1948, in British Columbia. His dad had died in an accident whenever he was very young, and later his mother remarried. The man she married was very supportive and stood with Granger every step of his life. Now, Granger Taylor, he was talented. He could fix almost any broken thing. He dropped out of school in the 8th grade and started working as a mechanic in a local shop. His mind was unmatched. His physical state was impressive. He was very tall. He was around 6'3", 6'4", but he was a little bit shy and a little eccentric. He did some stuff that was absolutely amazing, but his friends kind of jeered him around a little bit. Whenever Granger was in his 20s, He was fascinated by trains, aircraft engines, and one day he discovered an abandoned World War II P-40 Kitty Hawk plane right by the Trans-Canada Highway. That's an odd thing to see abandoned. So he gets a couple of the local kids that he mentored in repair, and he fixes the plane. He takes this plane, repairs it, and then sells it to a private collector in North Dakota. At this point, he's getting kind of famous for being able to repair stuff. And a large museum in British Columbia says, "Hey, can you come in and fix this steam engine?" And he was absolutely able to. It's almost an evolution with Granger Taylor. He starts with small devices, and then steam engines, airplanes, trains. He starts to become interested in space and space travel. Interested really isn't the word. Obsessed. He devoted all of his time to space exploration, space travel, UFOs. He read constantly. He had a huge library in his home dedicated to space. Taylor ends up building a replica UFO in his yard. He uses 2 satellite dishes. He kind of like welds them together. We're not talking small satellite dishes that you see today. We're talking these large, honking 12-foot, 13-foot affairs that have been around for ages. Back in the 80s, my neighbor had a giant, like 10-foot satellite dish in his yard. It was massive. So inside this 2 satellite dish treehouse, he gets a TV, a couch, a wood-burning stove, and just spends most of his time there thinking about the tech behind UFOs. Maybe it was a psychological break. Maybe it was insanity. Or maybe this really did happen, but in the late 1980s, Taylor shared with his friends that aliens had communicated with him telepathically while he was in his treehouse spaceship. He became absolutely convinced that the aliens would take him out into space. He said it happened when he was in bed. He was lying there. He would get telepathic communications from somebody from another galaxy. He couldn't see them. He said they were just talking to him in his mind. He was asking questions about what powered their craft. The only thing that the voices would tell him was that it was magnetic. Taylor ended up telling one of his friends, a man named Nielsen, that he got an invitation from his telepathic alien friends asking him to go on, quote, a trip through the solar system. On November 29th, 1980, Granger left his home. He got in his blue 1972 Datsun pickup truck and left behind everything. His parents ended up finding a note. It said, "Dear Mother and Father, I have gone away to walk aboard an alien spaceship, as recurring dreams assured me a 42-month interstellar voyage to explore the vast universe, then return. I am leaving behind all my possessions to you, as I will no longer require the use of any. Please use the instructions in my will as a guide to help. Love, Granger." His stepfather came forward and said the day before, Taylor had a long talk with him. He told Taylor that he was grateful to his stepfather for treating him like his own child. On the same day that he vanished, Taylor's stepfather found a map tacked to his bedroom door. A hand-drawn map of Waterloo Mountain. Taylor's family and friends hoped he would come back. It said 42 months, but it never happened. The last Taylor had been seen, he was leaving a local restaurant that same day about 6:30 p.m. Police began searching for him, and they never found a trace until March 1986. A few forest workers found truck fragments with bones at the site of an explosion on Mount Prevost near Taylor's home. The truck had belonged to Taylor. The bones were so small at that point. They were just fragments. DNA testing wasn't popular at the time, but the authorities had determined that it was Taylor. Soon a picture began to appear. Taylor had carried explosives in his truck for blasting tree stumps out. So maybe, just maybe, somehow the explosives accidentally blew up. But his friend Robert Keller had told the police that Taylor had often carried dynamite to blow up tree stumps. He had good experience handling dynamite, done it countless times. So what do you think happened to Granger Taylor? Did he accidentally blow himself up? Did he fake his death? Got tired of his boring life? Maybe, just maybe, he's riding aboard some spacecraft right now. There's a few things to remember. Granger Taylor had prepared 2 wills with detailed instructions about how his parents should pass out his possessions. He had scratched out the word deceased, replaced it with the word departed. The region that Taylor was from had been the region that had one of the most intriguing, interesting, and best documented flaps in UFO history just 10 years before the incident. In 1969 New Year's Eve, just a few miles from the Taylor home, a nurse named Doreen Kendall, she was able to look out the window of the hospital and see a craft, look into the craft. It was close enough that she saw people looking back at her. So the area is not a stranger to odd phenomena. As I was researching this case, one sickening thought kind of kept creeping in the back of my head. If I was a serial killer, Granger would be my perfect victim. Some guy who I could manipulate into believing he's going off into space for a 42-month trip. Lure him out into the woods. Just kill him and leave him out there. It's disturbing. And I believe it's happened before. I do believe it's happened before. On August 20th, 1966, a boy was flying a kite on Vintem Hill in the suburb of Rio de Janeiro. He looks a bit farther up the hill and he sees the bodies of 2 men. So he gets in touch with the police. Now, the police aren't able to get up to the bodies until the next day because the terrain is just so rough. But whenever they do get up there, 24 hours later, they find the 2 men stretched out side by side. They're dressed in very nice suits, covered in raincoats, and wearing lead masks over their faces. Now, a lot of sources I have said that these were the same kinds of masks used to protect against radiation, but from what I can find, they were really quite different in design. These masks, they really wouldn't have protected very much from radiation. These were homemade lead masks that were more like blindfolds. They completely covered the eyes but left the rest of the face open. It would have been impossible for them to see anything at all. The men were identified as Manuel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel Jose Viana. The only thing that was found on them was a water bottle, 2 wet towels, and a notebook. The notebook had some stuff written in it. It was a list of parts, other information that related to their occupations. These men were electronic technicians. One page, though, had weird instructions related to their death. The instructions were 1630, be at the specified location. 1830, ingest capsules. After the effect, protect metals. Await signal mask. They didn't run a toxicology report. That blows my mind. But supposedly the coroner was simply overwhelmed with work at the time. And the police didn't suspect foul play. These seemed to be 2 men that killed themselves. Didn't even push it. Soon a few journalists find out that these 2 men may have been members of kind of a scientific, spiritual collective. There was a paranormal group that was popular among the local electronic technicians. A friend of one of the 2 men claimed that this group was interested in trying to contact aliens and ghosts. And they constructed a device in one of the members' backyards to try to make contact. Police searched the homes of the men from Vintem Hill. They found everything necessary to make their homemade lead masks, a book that contained passages about intense luminosity of the aliens, the ghosts that they expected to reach. Supposedly, this paranormal group would ingest psychedelic drugs to aid in their communication attempts. A local newspaper ran a story a few days after the bodies were found, saying that there had been sighted a round orange UFO hovering over Vintem Hill the same night the men had been there. If the groups that the 2 men belonged to, Pereira da Cruz and Viana, maybe there was a reason for these men's deaths. If I'm trying to contact ghosts, maybe the easiest way to do that is put 2 of the members of my group on the other side. Hey there, Manuel. Miguel, come over here. Here's the psychedelics you're going to take. This is going to help you see the aliens. Put on the lead mask so you don't go blind. And take these pills. And instead of psychedelics, instead of LSD, ayahuasca, whatever that they thought was in the pills, there's a lethal dose of cyanide. History is rife with the mad scientist. And mad scientists did exist. No doubt about it. In the 1800s, grave robbing was a profession to get bodies for scientists to use. If you don't think mad scientists ever existed, look at the horrors that the Nazis did, that Josef Mengele did in the name of science. Mad science exists. But out there someplace, Are there mad paranormal investigators? Are there parapsychologists so intent, so insane in their research that they're willing to put people on the other side of death in an effort to contact them? Thank you for joining us again this week on Strange Pathways. Be sure to go over to our Facebook page. Look around. We're going to have a few photos pertaining to the tales that you were told today. Be sure to go over. Give us a like on YouTube. Subscribe to us over there. Leave a comment. If you're not the leave a comment type, go on over to strangepathwaysmail@gmail.com. You can contact me there. Tell me your stories. Tell me your concerns. Tell me what you would like to hear. Once again, thank you for joining me again this week. I'll see you guys next week. Take care of yourselves and each other.